Today we continue with the design of programs. In the last session, we talked about forward and backward programming to achieve a goal. The backward programs are those which provide the final consequence at each step, like learning to fall or the architectural students getting to design a structure at each step of the way. The forward programs, on the other hand, don't provide the goal at each step, but do rely on important consequences at each step or stage to maintain progress through the program. Today we'll discuss some other considerations in programming which will assist us in designing forward and backward programs. These techniques go by the names shaping, fading, imitation, and transfer. Let's get started.
Okay, today let's talk about program design.
Okay, basically it turns out that we can classify our methods of program design into several categories. There are two procedures to establish new behavior, if this is what we're interested in. One of them is through shaping, in which you start out with something new and gradually, step by step, change it. And the other is modeling, in which somebody shows how the new thing is to be done, and then you try to do parts of it.
Demonstration.
Demonstration of a kind, right. And this is how how I do it, you do it. There are two program designs for using the behaviors we already have in new ways. One way is fading, in which certain behaviors that we have, which are related to certain events in the environment, we then can transfer those behaviors to other ways of behaving. In this kind of change, what we do is make gradual changes in the environment, so until it gradually approximates the environment we're interested in for the behavior to occur. The other way is to transfer directly by looking to see what you have done successfully in a different area and then using that in the new area. And so basically these fall in the same shaping and fading. Both involve step-by-step change.
Mm-hmm.
Only one concerns starting a new behavior, the other concerns behavior you already have. And modeling and transfer are similar in that both concern using successes for yourself. One concerns the successes of others in what they're doing, and the other concerns the successes of yourself in the past.
Well, don't we learn to a certain extent by trial and error?
Well, basically, what we learn by trial and error is all kinds of emotional responses, how to gnash your teeth and grit them on. If you don't succeed at once, try again. We learn things like this. There are probably better ways of doing it, and the procedure I would favor has been called trial and success, that you program it in such a manner that the person does not make mistakes as he goes through it, in a careful way. That means you have to be very attentive to it. We can teach a child to swim in two ways. One is the old trial and error way. You take him out in the middle of the lake, throw him overboard, sink or swim. If he goes under, comes up again, splashes around, and, finally he sort of learns how to swim. He can do it. Another way to teach the child how to swim is to take him down to the pool and have him first look at the water and see the nice little things floating around. Then after a while he sits at the edge and puts his little toes in, and then he, step by step he does things, and before he knows it, no problems, he's swimming.
It's not ignoring error, it's eliminating it.
It's eliminating error by setting up a successful program to do it. And what happens is they both learn how to swim. Swimming has successfully been taught both ways. But there's a certain aftermath once you know how to swim, right? I need not tell you who is less likely to swim again, who is more likely to avoid pools and water and things like that.
Again, you're starting with the mountain first instead of the molehill. Can you give me like a specific example of how another errorless program works? How do we apply it?
Well, many of these procedures have been developed in the laboratory. For example, let's talk about new behaviors and about shaping right now.
Okay.
Okay? So basically we've got a 2-by-2 affair. One is how to establish behavior, how to use what you already have, and then we have two ways of doing it. Starting out with a itsy bitsy and working your way up. The other is seeing a success already and applying it. So now shaping is one of these. It's for new behavior. It starts out with something you have, but it's gradually going to change it. Now, if you want to train a pigeon to peck a disc, what you can do is illuminate the disc and wait for him to peck. And if he pecks anywhere but the disc, he might get a shock. Or, on the other hand, he doesn't get anything when he pecks the disc. And sooner or later, he may learn how to peck the disc and then get food for it. And sooner or later, he will. It's called self-shaping. It comes about to it. Another way is to observe the pigeon carefully and see what he already does. So the pigeon might be seated like this. And now if he raises his head a bit, you sound a buzzer, bzzz, that means dinner's ready. So when he hears that, he runs over to where dinner is. Then he's a little bit more excited. He's just had a little bit to eat, and he walks around, and then he sits down. But now he lowers his head. That head had something to do with it. He raises it a little more. Bzzz. Pretty soon his head is stretched. Bzzz. Now, to stretch his head, he stands up tall and erect, like a pigeon. And he does this, too. Then if he moves sideways, bzzz, dinner. 4 seconds, 4-second meal, snack. If he moves this way, finally you get him moving in front. Finally his head is hovering in front of that disc, and then he's pecking. Now it takes a beginning student, about 30 minutes to do this. It takes an experienced person, I can do it, and some of the people in my lab, in 2 minutes flat. Because we know what the program is, we know what to look for, we know what to reinforce step by step by step by step.
And I guess, to reiterate, what makes sense to the pigeon.
Yeah, but you see, this is a highly, shall we say, to use a technical term, improbable response for pigeons. Pigeons don't go pecking up. That's woodpeckers. Pigeons peck down, and we can train them to peck up. 2 minutes flat, using the appropriate condition.
When you think about it, we really don't learn a whole lot from our errors, except what not to do next time. This only helps when our choices are limited, as in a true-false situation. Having the wrong address for someone doesn't tell us the right one. Knowing what day it isn't doesn't let us know today's date. Being right, however, lets us know what to do the next time. So errorless programs do make sense, and as Dr. Goldiamond pointed out, they avoid the frustration and anger often associated with being wrong. Shaping, the first technique today, involves identifying the current behavior, which most closely resembles the goal which we are trying to establish. The where are we now in relation to where we want to go. A program is then instituted whereby closer and closer approximations of the final goal are rewarded with a critical consequence. Now, what I want to know is, when would we be concerning ourselves with an already established behavior? And just what is fading? We've been talking about changing behavior, but you mentioned that we'd also talk about some procedures that used current behavior, like for instance.
Well, the fading procedure uses currently available, currently established behavior. The behavior occurs under certain conditions, but you would like the behavior to occur under different conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's, that's where the payoff might be or something. Like a child might learn how to read at school. The question is, how do you get him to
read at home?
To read at home or something. That's not simply fading, but sometimes they start, when the children first start to read, it just has to be where they are. It just has to be where they are, using the conditions under which they're familiar.
Mm-hmm.
So what you want to do now is to change the conditions. I recall when my daughter first learned to read, and she came home from school and demonstrated it to us, she sat with one leg crossed over the other. And I said, well, how about, you have to straighten your legs. She says, I can't read when I straighten my legs. She had been taught that way. Okay. It sounds sort of silly, but that's the way it was. And so we'll gradually, you can move your legs apart slowly or something.
Yes.
But,
scratch your head at the same time.
Yeah, or something. Yeah, that's right. Actually, these procedures, again, come from the laboratory. In the fading procedures, we use a step-by-step procedure to change the conditions, which then will occasion a certain specified pattern of behavior that we already learned. What we're going to see now in this laboratory demonstration is a pigeon who has been taught to turn. When the light goes on or illuminating the word turn presented in black, and has been taught to peck at the disc when the word peck appears. He has been taught through shaping procedures, gradually being shaped to do one or the other. There he was pecking at the red peck. Pecks again at the red peck, gets reinforced for doing so. Now the word turn appears. And in the initial shaping procedure, what happened was that each time he made a movement of turning, the buzzer sounded and he got food. That was the dinner bell. By now, the behavior has been well established, and he turns when the word turns appears in black. Now here is the word peck in red, and he pecks and gets his food. The word turn appears, and he functions appropriately. Now what will gradually be done is that the red word peck is going to be changed into the black word peck, so that the only difference between peck and turn will be the form of the letters rather than the color. As you can see, the turn is in black, and he has no problems with the turn. The peck is where the change is going to be. Now that's still a good red peck, and he pecked at it and got it, pecks at it again and again, and he gets his food. And now there's another peck that has a little bit less red and more black in it. Uh-oh, you see that peck had a little bit too much black, and the black was presented too soon, and the pigeon is responding to the black, and he has sort of gotten mixed signals. He doesn't know what to do with that blackish red word peck. It's the fault of the programmer that the pigeon has not handled it appropriately. The programmer simply went too fast. Now that was a program regression, shall we say. It was moved to a red peck, and now he's back there. And now it's a peck again, a reddish peck, and he pecks back. He's back to where he was before, to square one. Has no problem, you will see, with regard to that turn, because nothing is going to be changed about the turn. But now the programmer will proceed more carefully.
Again, we are dealing with a step-by-step approach. Only this time we're changing the conditions rather than the behavior itself. The behavior, say studying, stays the same, but we study in gradually noisier places or for a little longer each time. So fading involves a change in conditions, and shaping involves a change in the behavior. One makes use of the environmental supports to get a new behavior, and the other uses a current behavior under new conditions. These techniques are important, and I think I have another one which might help. Show the person what you want done. Well, what about showing a person how to do it? Isn't that a direct way of getting someone to try new things?
That way is quite direct, and as a matter of fact, sometimes it's the simplest way around. When the person shows the person and sets up a program of showing in this way, that's called modeling. When the person does this and the other person does it, you say that the model is modeling and the observer is imitating. It's the same thing. Modeling is, however, what the programmer does. A beautiful and very touching example of modeling is given by Baer and Patterson in an article they wrote on a mentally retarded girl of early school age named Susie, who was considered untestable. She had no speech whatever. The head nurse said the trouble with Susie is she's a sweet girl, but she cannot remember from one minute to the next. She has no memory. She didn't, as I said, she could not speak. And so what they decided to do was they would have Susie imitate them, or they would model appropriate speech, step by step by step. Now, Susie in the past had seen other people doing this. She wasn't imitating them, so other kinds of modeling, in quotes, hadn't worked, and just simply showing her what to do hadn't worked. So they had to show her what to do in a program. So the program started, the first thing they did was to find out what Susie loved in particular, and it turns out Susie was absolutely crazy over applesauce. So they had the applesauce ready, and Baer and Patterson worked together, and one of them said, "Susie, do this." And Susie sort of looked. He said, "Susie, do this." And Susie sort of looked. He said, "Susie, do this." And simultaneously, the other person picked up Susie's arm and put it on her head. And when he did that, the other pair of hands immediately put a spoon of applesauce into her mouth. And so then they said, Susie smiled, and they said, "Susie, do this," and Susie didn't do it. "Susie, do this," Susie didn't do it.
Susie, do this,
Susie,
applesauce.
The applesauce, and so on. It took about 150 such before by the end of the 150 they said, "Susie, do this," and Susie did this.
Susie got applesauce.
And Susie got
smiles.
applesauce and smiled. She was accomplishing things. Next day they came in, "Susie, do this." No dice. See, the nurse said, "She can't remember." And so this time they tried it again patiently. It took about 60 sessions. Next time it took 30. Next one was 20. Then there was a 60 or something like that. Then whenever they did this, Susie did that. She did remember from one day to the next. So having done this now, they said, "Now, Susie, do this." Well, they had to build that up again. When she did that, they tried to get her to do this, so she didn't do that. Well, anyway, so they linked them both together, She got it when she did this, she didn't get it when she did that, depending on what was appropriate. Then they gradually began to build it up more and more and more. They then had her doing a whole sequence of things, doing things first and second and so on. And then they told Susie, they would say, "Susie, pick up the chalk from the blackboard, put it on the table, go to the coat rack, take the hat off, put the hat down, pick up the umbrella in the umbrella stand, open it, take the chalk and put it in there, and do that." And Susie listened attentively. You remember that sequence? Susie did. And Susie went through the whole sequence. Then now among the things they asked Susie to do, she was doing sequences now. And they asked Susie now, okay, Susie, Susie, do this. Pick up the chalk, this, that, and showed her. And then they said, that was one of the things she's supposed to imitate. And when Susie came to that, she didn't. So now the task was to get her to do that. They discovered if they put that at the very end of the sequence, it was more likely to do it. And they began to shape that up more and more and more. And gradually, within a short time, they had Susie talking. It wasn't a short time. It took well over a year to do it. And their big moment of surprise and joy was when the head nurse walked in one day and Susie sitting on the bed, and the nurse beamed and said, "Good morning, Susie." And Susie says, "Good morning." And the nurse sort of fell to the floor as you would if your dog said good morning to you.
With Susie, the modeling techniques were used in conjunction with a shaping technique. New behaviors were established using the knowledge that she liked applesauce and giving it to her when she more closely approximated the behaviors being modeled. Once modeling is established, it can be used to train a whole variety of things. In the case of Susie, the program was a long one, involving thousands of steps. Because the goals were defined and each instance of progress recorded and noticed, discouragement was avoided. And just because they were doing something which hadn't been done before, and which they were told couldn't be done, they didn't give up. They could see their progress. Now, let's find out what this final technique, transfer, is all about. Okay, now I know there's a fourth procedure. So far we have shaping and imitation to establish new behaviors, and we only have fading so far for using old behaviors. So the last technique must use behaviors that we already know.
That's correct. It follows in this pattern, and this last pattern is known as transfer. And in transfer, again, we use a step-by-step procedure. We see behavior somewhere. The person himself has it. You know, he sort of models himself on what he did before, or what he's doing elsewhere successfully. And the behavior he has and sees it there, or tries to find out what it is that he's doing successfully in that area. And now the problem is simply to get him to transfer this behavior to the new and required situation. In this context, I'd like to cite the rather touching case in which an art teacher used transfer for a young art student, a woman who was a very good painter. Her paintings were absolutely meticulous, you know, very neat, you know, not this fuzzy stuff, but very neat, precise lines and colors put in precisely. It was beautiful stuff. And she herself was an absolute sloppy mess. Her hair was unkempt, her clothing was, everything about her was in a mess, and she sort of didn't want to do this, didn't want to be this way. And this would also hinder her because she would have to face clients in posh offices and so forth. And so what this art teacher did was to use some transfer procedures with her.
Almost finished?
Oh, yeah.
It's a very nice job.
Thank you.
I think that's probably the best thing you've done in 3 years.
Oh, do you think so?
Mm-hmm. Seems funny, though.
Yeah?
Well, the detail and the care that you've taken to do this painting, and then, well, to look at yourself, it seems like two different people.
Well, I know I'm a mess, but there doesn't seem to be too much I can do about it. I've really tried, and, well...
If she took off her smock, you'd see that she's pretty messy underneath. Her instructor decided to transfer some of the neatness in her painting to her own personal grooming.
Say, I've got an idea. I've got to pick up some frames for the department tonight. I'd like some company. Would you like to come along?
Oh, I'd love to.
Great. Why don't you get your coat?
Okay. Be right there.
Okay.
had noticed during a previous visit to her attic apartment that she was too poor to afford a mirror. Accordingly, he instructed the storekeeper to put a mirror into one of the large frames.
So, you know, the frame with a mirror in it is awfully heavy. I don't think I want to carry it back to the Institute tonight.
Okay.
Why don't you keep it for a while?
Okay.
Okay? Good.
How's that? Right?
A little more. A little more. Other way. There.
Oh, good.
Do you like it?
Sure. Love it.
Look at yourself now. Now you're framed just like all of the other paintings you have on the wall.
But I'm a mess.
What he transferred was the fact that her painting was neat. And so he transferred that pattern, which she had toward a canvas, to looking at herself as a canvas, using the mirror procedures and all the other ingenious means he used, and there was no problem with her. Now, I do recall I was working with a woman whose mother had never invited people to the house. She was sort of, quote, antisocial, unquote. She herself never invited people for supper or anything of the sort. And her husband was sort of complaining. And she said, well, I just don't have the skills to be sociable and to get people together.
It scared her.
It scared her, yeah. But the point about it was that she was a TV director of talk shows. And she would get strange people to come together on these kind of talk shows. She did. And so I said, don't you do this for a living? Yes. You do it well, don't you? You've been promoted. And she said, oh, yes. Says, and how about treating your guests as TV people for a talk show? You know, seat them in the
Seems so obvious, but not when it's too close to home.
Well, it's more than that, of course. She was so accustomed to looking at what she couldn't do and her deficits and the history of the deficits going way back to her mother. Obviously, she was just paralyzed about it.
By modeling our own behavior under new conditions, we can transfer these actions to new settings. Neatness is the example used. Neatness, which was present in the student's artwork, was transferred to care of herself. In this way, new behaviors do not have to be learned from scratch, but can be drawn from one's own strengths and skills. The techniques we have seen today can be applied constructionally in any of a variety of programs which you decide on. Remember, assess those strengths and skills which may have something to do with the goal. Neat artwork is relevant to a neat person. In the next program, we see how this can all be applied, how a constructional approach changes people's lives.